All right, good morning. I should introduce myself. My name is Brian Doyle. I am a professor of theology here, and I also coordinate this faculty seminar on the Catholic intellectual tradition. So I was going to talk a little bit about kind of the history of that, what it does, and then turn it over to three participants. My plan was to sit over next to Faith, and Raj said I had to sit here, so here I sit. It became clear a couple years ago, Carolyn Oxenford began by asking me and then myself and Dr. Flanagan and Dr. Porter to come to new faculty orientations to do 45, 50 minutes on what it means to teach at a Catholic university. It was not nearly enough for the 2,000 years of history we wanted to discuss, let alone, and we were supposed to include things on the charism of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, which Sister Porter would do, and then we look at pictures of Bezier and no one would be listening anymore. It was too much, there's too much information for not enough time, and those new faculty also had to learn how to do HR and pronounce GAIAC and how the shuttle runs. And what occurred to us was that there was, with the questions, with the conversations, it was clear that there was more of a thirst for this information on campus than we had realized. So with the help of my department, I developed a seminar. We meet 4 or 5 Wednesdays in the fall with specific readings. We have some other members who've done some that are going through it now. It's on the Catholic intellectual tradition. So we have had people of Catholic, we've had what we call cradle Catholics, people born Catholic, people converted to Catholicism, non-Catholic Christians, several people of other faiths, people of no faiths. We've had atheists as well. It's not about converting anyone, it's about learning what is specific and unique to Catholic higher ed. And then we have an entire set of readings on the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. So specific, what does it mean to teach at Marymount? We've had this, I'm in the midst of the 3rd cohort. Don't tell Sherry it because I've learned more than everybody else combined. It's every time these are new questions and I'm writing them down. I take copious notes as and then I don't show them to anybody because most of it's, oh my God, I didn't even know that. So it's been a good experience that I would encourage you to, those who haven't participated, to think about. What we did last year is we had a breakfast meeting with the first 2 cohorts and brought them together to say, so how did your experiences go? And one of the things that came out of that was, we need to do something with this. It can't just be the 8 of us having this seminar. We need to do something. So what do you want to do? And Bob Otten said we should have a session at Innovations. And he's preparing for class. He does. He has a 9:30 class, I think. But that was his idea, that we come to Innovations and share those ideas. It doesn't have a prescriptive conclusion. That's what that cohort came up with. In probably January, I'll get the 3 cohorts together. And will we do this again? I don't know. Will we write a joint paper? Will we have a sock hop? I don't know what the group will decide. Probably it's the knitting that got the word sock hop out. But so I guess I want them to be able to share their experiences, see if we can find some overlapping themes. But this is a new entity on Marymount's campus, so I thought it important to provide kind of some structure for those of you who may not know who and what we are. So I will let, Jennifer's going to go first. I asked them a couple preparatory questions, and then we'll let Lee and then Raj go third. That's fair.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Tripkin, and I took this seminar in my first semester teaching here. So this was the fall of 2012, and I was interested in taking this seminar because Marymount was a Catholic institution. I really had no idea what that meant. In fact, Brian spoke a little bit about it, the new teacher orientation. Dr. Flanagan actually stepped in and talked a little bit about that, and it was a nice introduction. It was something that I never thought about. So I really went into the seminar with 3 big questions, and that was, what does it mean to teach at a Catholic university? Does that mean I have to be Catholic, or do I have to teach some stories, and do I need to have this knowledge or background on it? I wanted to know how is that going to affect my teaching and my research and my service, and then finally, how is this any different than if I were to go teach down the road at a non-religious institution? So those were the three overarching questions that I had answered, and I'm going to share with you just very briefly how I went about answering those through the readings and the discussions that we had at the seminar. And so one of the things that really struck with me and stuck with me is the reciprocal relationship that Catholic University is really only as Catholic as the faculty teach and what they engage in. So that kind of back and forth reciprocity was something that struck me. Here at Marymount, we do have a mission statement regarding our Catholic identity and what does it mean, the Catholic tradition. If you go on the website, that's right underneath the main banner. But then how do I carry that out? How do I, as a member of this community, live that and see that through my work? So one of the things that I remembered was that the root meaning of Catholic was toward wholeness. And so for me, I related that to how is everything that I do, the way that I teach and my research, working toward the integration of wholeness? How do I put into perspective for students that this is just part of a bigger picture? Or how is my research contributing to something bigger than what it actually appears? So a good example of this in my field, I'm in public health and epidemiology. And with the recent Ebola outbreak, there's a lot of chatter about that, and it could be used as a very teachable moment, but at the same time, I need to keep in mind, how does this relate to wholeness? How is this just a small blip on the screen of infectious diseases? How is this just a small blip on the scene of ethics as well as health disparities and inequities? So that's something that I'm more mindful of, and I really contribute that toward understanding that what I am part of has to do with trying to reach this integration of wholeness. So it's more or less just a mindfulness factor. Another thing that I really enjoyed and stuck with me is that you don't have to be Catholic to go to school here, to teach here, to work here. And that, I think that's a big myth or misperception about a religious institution. It was something that I was a little bit fearful of myself, is do I have to be Catholic, and it's interesting because sometimes in interviews for various positions that I've sat on, people are wearing their cross, or they'll mention it as if this is a huge factor in our decision, whereas working in a Catholic school is more about being open to diversity and welcoming that friendly conversation. So it's not subscribing just to one way of thought, but it's inviting others and really embracing that. And that was surprising to me. I was shocked, and I was very happy to work at an institution where we welcome that, we celebrate that, and we want to engage in conversation about that. We always preach about how we're one of the most diverse colleges in the South, and I don't think I really understood what that meant until I understood it in the context of being a Catholic institution. And then the last part about the seminar was about service to others, and that part of the Catholic identity is a struggle to minimize or even to eliminate social injustice and disparities. And so how do I go about integrating service into my classroom? How do I go about encouraging students to be involved, to work toward resolving these disparities that exist? Of course, I'm pretty lucky because the health field lends itself very well to addressing disparities. But once again, being mindful that this is an important aspect of a Catholic identity and reminding students, as well as myself, how do we go about working toward these? So in addition to teaching, I guess, I also questioned about my research interests and how am I not only teaching toward these principles, but how am I, as a researcher, contributing to the community with the idea that a university is only as Catholic as the faculty members research and teach and communicate who they are. So similar to the idea that maybe people in the church, and I get this from Sister Act, so Whoopi Goldberg asked about the call, and I can relate to that because I feel like I had a call to be in academia. I had a call to teach. I absolutely know this is what I am meant to do, and I have a purpose. And so I can relate very similar to people in a church who have that same feeling in terms of that it does require a sacrifice. There is putting the needs of others first, and kind of making that connection between the two. Is my research a matter of getting my tenure and quantity, or does my research reflect integration of the whole and the search for truth? Does it work to eliminate disparities and to bring forth this idea of social justice? And so I took a look at my research agenda and where I want to go. And yes, quantity and funding are important factors, but at the same time, what responsibility do I have working at a Catholic institution to align myself with some of these values and live these values through everything I do? The last one is, how do I go about playing an active role in shaping the university and its mission and living the Catholic identity? And I realized that that comes through self-awareness and reflection, thinking about all the things that I mentioned here about how does my teaching integrate to the whole, how am I encouraging service to others, and how is my research reflecting some of these core values of the Catholic identity without necessarily subscribing to the religion itself. And so I guess that's my conclusion here is I was more aware of my role as well as the influence of the university on me. And so I took this with some responsibility that I have to teach in a way that encompasses these values, as well as to conduct myself not only through research, but through my service to live these values as well. So I'm very appreciative because I now have a better understanding of how this is different than working at a non-religious institution. I can speak to what exactly is the Catholic identity, and I have a good idea of what it means to be a member of this institution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I was a count. I got rash going on. All right, Lee.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lee Johnson. I'm in the Literature and Languages Department, and I did the seminar in fall of 2013. So the second seminar. I'm going to talk a little bit about the disciplinary specifics of how this applies to my field and kind of thinking about where that led me in terms of the seminar. So what it means for literature composition. I teach early American literature, and Mexican American or Chicano literature, other ethnic literatures. And then I also teach writing at the 101 level for the students and writing intensive classes. So one of the first things that I encountered in the seminar was Brian has a great book that gives you the Catholic tradition in the disciplines. And so there are several readings and you can choose from which of these would be appropriate for your discipline. So the ones about literature really brought up the question of in the canon or out. What kinds of things can you access through a Catholic tradition in literary readings? And so there were things about thinking about literature, like thinking about Aquinas's writings as literary pieces, or thinking about the Inferno as a piece of literature that's also looking at Catholic traditions. But that's not really what I do. So I was thinking, how is this going to be something that I can access? Much of my work that I study is out or critical. So it's either out of the tradition altogether, or because I do Mexican American literature, much of it is critical of the way that the church has shaped gender roles or the way that the church has shaped identity. And so it forced me to reflect on the fact that I bring these into my classes and present them to students and say, let's talk about this, without thinking about how that might affect students who are also questioning how their experiences with the church have shaped their lives. So I wanted to think more about this as a way of creating both a safe space for students to think about what they were learning in the classes, what they were learning in their other classes at Marymount, and their personal life experiences. But I also realized that Marymount has a huge advantage when presented with these kinds of works. For instance, we were reading Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands, and she has a very long discussion about the ways that she talks, or the ways that she has conceptualized the Virgin of Guadalupe. And so in other teaching experiences, I've had to explain what the Virgin of Guadalupe is. I had one student in class who was adamant that this was a blasphemous interpretation of Mary. But I had 5 other students from different ethnic backgrounds, different Latino backgrounds, who said, oh no, this is the way we talk about the Virgin in our culture, and this is the way we do it in our culture, and this is the way. And so the class had a much bigger picture of what that particular symbol meant, and then they were able to tap into this experience. So that they were able to understand much more than I could have explained to them, because they were learning from each other. And so one of the things that I took away from the seminar is that laying the groundwork in the class to allow students to learn from each other and their own experiences is really important. And it's not just something that is bound in the theology and religious studies department, but it's something that can come across in other disciplines as well, because students do have personal experience and they do have the ability and interest to talk about these things. In the composition class that I teach, 101, the students do a service learning project at the beginning of the semester. And I've done this before at other institutions, but I was really impressed that Marymount students have already had a lot of experience with service, especially those who have gone to Catholic high schools, and they have a lot of experience thinking about poverty and hunger and the ways that their actions influence social justice. So that's been a pleasant surprise as well, and I want to talk about what that means for the future in a little bit. So that's an overview of how I think about this seminar in both literature and composition classes. One of the things that I think is interesting as well is that students, what does it mean in the classroom? Their interest and ability to discuss these topics is there. And so going to the seminar, the Catholic intellectual tradition, made me realize that a time to discuss this is also a time that can be well spent in the classroom, because it's a place that they have an entry point. They're interested because it's something that they've done in other disciplines. But it also allows us to get to a fundamental concept in literary study, that there is some kind of way of understanding literature that can tell us something about the world without it having to be literal truth. That I present books to my students, and mostly I teach novels and fiction, and they always want to know, is this true? And so we talk about, well, no, it's not literally true. This didn't happen exactly this way to the person writing the story, and we wouldn't want it that way. And even if it was a memoir, it still wouldn't be literal truth. And so, but then it allows us to open up, where can we find the kernels of truth that might speak to us individually or personally, or on a more universal level. And so building that interest has been really significant after thinking about the Catholic intellectual tradition. What kinds of things can our disciplines offer students, not just within a Catholic student perspective, but what kinds of ways can our disciplines speak to them in their own faiths or their own interests. So what does it mean for the future of my teaching? For me, it opens up a lot for ethnic differences and diversity in the classroom. It allows us to talk more about personal experiences, backgrounds. Several of the things I teach deal with El Salvadoran refugees and the ways that community has been involved in social justice and liberation theology, and that having this other background has sort of enriched that discussion. Most recently, last night, I taught a novel about Haiti, and so it had an evangelical Protestant preacher who was murdered by the regime, and a woman who had epileptic seizures who was interested in the miracles that she would read about, and then there was also the voodoo tradition. And so all of these competing religious traditions are present in the text, and it was a really fun experience to talk with the students about this, because again, bringing in their own backgrounds and differences. And then also thinking about the ways that literature and composition serve a social justice mission as well, through the ways that literature can affect change and the ways that writing in communities can also affect change. So all of those things are takeaways from the Catholic intellectual tradition. But I would say that one of my biggest takeaways from the fall was that I was really struggling with a particular student in a classroom that was very emotionally affected by anything that was critical of Catholicism in the classroom. And so I had Brian at my disposal on a regular basis to say, I need some help with this, what can I do? And so it really helped me sort of work through some of those teaching challenges as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Raj Nasser. I come from Lebanon, and I've been in this university for over 2 decades now, and I'm not a Catholic, but this doesn't mean that I'm not familiar with Catholicism, because I have many relatives who are Catholic. And I've been to Catholic churches in Lebanon and here, but when there was this opportunity of learning about the Catholic faith and Catholic higher education, I thought it was a marvelous opportunity for me to get to know more about the Catholic faith to begin with, and Catholic policy stemming from the Vatican. And so I joined that group a couple of years ago, and I must say that the group was, and the discussions were magnificent, enjoyable, and very informative. I must say that our moderator was also exceptionally wonderful in the way he conducted the sessions, and the members all participated in wonderful discussions. This was over lunch every time we met, so there was a social element involved, and our minds were fed, and so were our tummies as well. When I started working in this university, I thought to myself, as I've always done throughout my life, when serving colleges, universities, countries, and so on. I've trained teachers in 21 countries and served 16 governments educationally. And every time I went to a country or to a school system, I wanted to know their objectives, I wanted to know what their aspirations were, in order to make my training or my ideas and so on fit into their scheme of things, and to help them enhance their particular programs and so on. So I thought this was a marvelous opportunity, and I wanted to know more about the faith, which I did learn a lot about, and also I wanted to know something about the official, if there was a chance, the official position of the Vatican with regard to a number of issues. We were made to read a good number of books and a good number of articles, and those were extremely interesting and very informative. I enjoyed those thoroughly and brought up a number of points in the discussions that influenced me quite a bit, because they were things that I didn't think the Catholic Church or the Vatican would make such pronouncements about. Anyway, but just to give you a little background about my approach to service, educational service. As I mentioned, I would like to know, I always wanted to know the aims and objectives of different ministries of education and countries and so on. And I published a number of books in England and by Longman, and my publishers in London consulted me quite frequently when they were preparing textbooks, English textbooks, for different countries, especially Arab countries. And so I would meet very frequently with the authors of those series of books and give them opinions and things like that. There was one project that they undertook for the government of Saudi Arabia, preparing English textbooks for the country. And they hadn't contacted me about that. They had a team working on the project. After the books were published, soon after they were published, I was doing some work for the Ministry of Education in Saudi Arabia. And this was probably the most luxurious office I had been in. It was actually a mini museum. I mean, it was phenomenal. Mahogany desk, all carved, so on, and pictures and paintings and all over the place. It was marvelous. The Minister of Education later became king. I was with him and we discussed the business quite at length. And then he sort of swung his recliner all the way back just for the sake of having a little informal discussion. So he said, so how do you like our new English textbooks? I said, I've just studied them, I don't like them. His recliner came forward, he said, you don't like them? Why not? They had just adopted them. I said, because I have read your aims of education. He said, well, what's wrong with our aims of education? And in Saudi Arabia, the first aim of education is Islam. So it's a state religion. That's the first aim in education, Islam. He said, what's wrong? I said, nothing is wrong with it. But how can you have an important aim of education as Islam and not have in your textbooks certain words? He said, like what? I said, like mosque, like prayer, like God, like prophet, like almsgiving, like witnessing, like pilgrimage. He said, those words are not there? I said, no. He said, well then, I don't like that serious either. Now, of course, when you go to Saudi Arabia, if anyone has been there, they know exactly who you are, what your faith is, etc. And then he looked at me and he said, you're a Christian and you're telling me that? I said, when I'm in Saudi Arabia, I'm a Saudi. He said, Barakallah, which means God bless. That idea of mine, that approach of mine, I thought would be enhanced if I attended this seminar. And I learned so much because I came here and knowing that this was a Catholic university, and although I'm not a Catholic, I felt that my mission here was at heart supporting the Catholic identity and the Catholic approach to education. And from this seminar I learned that there was a very intimate relationship between education and faith. So the faith required a lot of education, and education based on Catholic faith would also make it flourish and move forward and have value and so on. So from the seminar I learned a lot, and for my courses, not all courses would lend themselves to an easy mention of anything relating to religion, but in one of my courses, which deals with foundations of education, when we talk about the bases of education, talk about the philosophical basis of education, the social basis of education, the political basis of education, the economic basis of education, and the religious basis of education. And when it comes to the religious basis of education, I have no hesitation to say, look around, take a look at the crucifixes. This is a Catholic university. I have many Muslims in class, I have some Jews in class. I say, this is symbolic of what the founders of this university and the administration want people to know about. And I mentioned to them, I say, I'm not a Catholic, but I say I can recall reading about the first inaugural address given by a Presbyterian missionary who started what is now the American University of Beirut, which at one time, I don't know if it is now, the largest American institution outside of the United States. He was a Presbyterian missionary who started that university, and in his first inaugural address, he said, we welcome students from all nationalities, from all religions, from all races, but nobody who comes to this university will leave it not knowing what we believe and why. And I say, and in this university, this is the same motto. It is not spelled out in the same way, in the same words, but this is implied in our approach to education in this university. So there is no compulsion at all. We have at least 2 religious services per day. We have a chapel. There's no imposition. This is an open university, welcoming everybody of all faiths, and all nationalities, and all races, and all cultures. So the openness, the welcoming, the diversity we have in this university are practical attributes of the faith that this university has in its Catholicism and so on. And then from a broader point of view, this is outside of my classroom and outside of the university, I felt when I read some of the things that emanated from the Vatican. This is the official position of the Catholic Church in the Vatican. Two things impressed me quite a bit. Number one, in my church, I was raised in the Anglican Church, but I've been a Presbyterian for a number of decades, and I've been quite active in the Presbyterian Church. And for about 20, 25 years, I was on two national committees of the Presbyterian Church USA here in America. But in our church, sometimes we sing hymns written by Martin Luther. We always liked Martin Luther. My wife is a Lutheran, and from a Lutheran church. And so I thought, okay, what he did, what Luther did in the Catholic Church was probably not looked upon as something, but that he was excommunicated. But then I felt, perhaps, I've always felt this, that perhaps the selling of indulgences was probably not the right thing for a church. And the official position of the Catholic Church in the Vatican says, much of the reform in the Catholic Church stemmed from the work of Martin Luther, who was excommunicated. I thought, this is fantastic. I mean, that there's an admission that this thing has contributed to the reform in the Catholic Church. I thought it was magnificent. In another book, I read a statement that said that the Crusades were a travesty. And I thought, this is fantastic, because I come from the Muslim world, and the Muslim world particularly is against the West, and particularly against the Christians because of the Crusades. And I mentioned, I think, in one of our sessions, I said, if this position of the Catholic Church in the Vatican is made public internationally, it will ease the tension between the Muslims and the Christians around the world, because to have the Catholic Church say the Crusades were travesties is something that should be publicized, that should be made public. So when I have a chance with I have many Muslim friends, with my Muslim friends I say, this is the position, and they say, really? I say, yes, of course. And it should ease the conflict that we have in many parts of the world. So in a sense, while I am not a Catholic, I am a Catholic at heart in this university because of the tremendous impact that the faith has had on the people, the faculty, the students, the university itself, the community, and I feel proud and happy to be a part of the service in a Catholic university like this. Thank you very much.
For a minute there, I thought you were going to make me king of Saudi Arabia. I like the direction that was going. So I picked up a few themes, but I think we only have about 10 or 15 minutes left. So rather than, if we need me to highlight those, I will. If not, I thought I'd open it up to see questions or comments. I think we have some that have gone through the seminar and some who are going through it now. May or may not have comments, but there's others. So comments or questions for our panelists? Go ahead, Amory.
We talked a little bit about in our own seminar, and I talked with Brian. I was raised Catholic, so, but my dad went to Boston College and just thinks the Jesuits are the greatest. But I think what's difficult in my growing up and being part of the Catholic Church, and what I hear from people who are currently going to church, and what might be difficult for some of our students is, depending on where you go to Mass, and if the teachings are proscriptive versus you will do this, and if you don't, you're breaking the rules of the church, and what this might mean for some of our extremely faithful students of, if we have these conversations as you're all talking about, is this seen as criticism of the church versus the ability to be open and have a dialogue. And that's what kind of intellectual curiosity is about, is the differing of opinions. So that's my one struggle, is I think we've got, and again I say we as a Catholic, the new Pope is open to that diversity, and so I'm very grateful to be at Marymount at this time. But I don't know how people feel about that, if that's a concern, but the fact that you said Brian was there for you, I could see what that could be. You know, again, you want, I've been challenged even in Arizona by Democrat versus Republican issues, so anyway, if anybody has, how they dealt with that.
I don't actually have how to deal with it, but I wanted to ask a question that I think is related, and it's draws from something that it's Lee, that you said, Lee, that I found both quite important, as well as I'm not sure that we have the answer for. It's that you said that you found laying the groundwork in the classroom for students to learn from their experiences and to learn from each other to be extremely important. Absolutely agree. And yet I wonder, how do we lay the groundwork for our students to kind of speak through diversity, to speak through difference, to feel comfortable in our classrooms, to actually take advantage of the wonderful diversity that we do have at this institution. And I teach sociology. I teach courses related to social justice on a daily basis. And I find the richness, the diversity of our classroom to be one of the kind of the central and most important resources that we have here to actually talk about these issues. And yet I also feel that our students are still very uncomfortable to talk through these issues. And I just kind of I think that it's a similar question about, like, how do we lay the groundwork for our students to feel
safe,
comfortable, safe, to speak about these contentious and difficult issues.
I was interested in the word dialogue that you mentioned. I think interfaith dialogues are extremely important. And in different places where we lived in the United States, in Michigan and here, my wife and I started in our church, different churches, dialogues between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And those were fantastic. And I think these interfaith discussions should mushroom, should multiply around the world, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about religious faiths and practices. I think this can ease a lot of tension and develop understanding, and perhaps in some way contribute to peace around the world. I think it's a very important thing. And there's more attachment to faith elements these days behind political movements, which also can alleviate a lot of the problems and a lot of the misunderstandings, and perhaps bring about more peace around the world. So it's a very good point.
And I think a lot of the groundwork is happening in 100 and 200 level classes. It's not something that's on our sheet for the different levels that we're teaching at. But I don't notice this as much when I'm teaching 100 level classes. Students are much more reticent about their personal experience bringing in. So in some of those more advanced classes, my 300 level American Dream or Major Women Writers, that's where the students really start to feel more comfortable about engaging those issues. But I think that there's some kind of culture at Marymount of people in the different disciplines opening those conversations for students, such that when they're at junior, senior level, they're ready to look at it more critically and to look at their own experiences more critically too. So I don't really know where it's happening or how it's happening, but I definitely think like the early stuff where they're studying social justice movements, or they're studying like they're doing service learning in some of their early classes, or they're taking theological inquiry, or they're, any of those places where they're starting to see that they're not a homogenous population here is really useful for them, because when they get to a space where they're encouraged to be more critical, then they're ready for it.
Go ahead then.
I just wanted to add, in terms of religion, I think a lot of faculty are uncomfortable talking about it in the classroom because they don't know a lot about other religions. And so this is such a great thing because we do get challenged. Students will say, well, Catholics do this, Catholics do that. Well, it's bullshit. And it's just as much bullshit when they say Muslims don't drink and Buddhists don't do warfare. And it's all, we can push them to think more critically if we are educated. And so this is great. And having more, if religion is the area that is coming up, then that's a great thing to have more conversation about. If it's race, then if the faculty member is comfortable pushing back on the student who's espousing superficial ideas, then I think that helps teach them how to do it.
Just to add to that, one thing that I try to keep in my mind is this quote that I read a long time ago. I have no idea who said it, but it was, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And I take that approach, and that speaks to me because I feel like part of our role is to challenge students. If they're so comfortable in their views, what are we going to do to challenge them to either become more firmly believing in their views or to have the opportunity to critically analyze and then perhaps seek other venues. And I absolutely agree that we ourselves must be willing to feel that uncomfortableness and that to be okay, because that offers an opportunity to explore and learn. And I think that was something we brought up in our joint session meeting was, what do we do with students who are having sort of a crisis of faith? This is a very important time where they're starting to form their identity, and they should question all the things that they've just bought into their whole life. So what opportunities do we allow, and ultimately try to comfort them as they come to either more firmly believing in their truths or discovering a new truth? And that's the purpose of higher education, in a lot of ways.
Brian.
So BuzzFeed and Gawker seem to be consistently referring to the Pope these days as cool Pope Francis, right? That's become part of this title. And if you're one of your primary experiences of learning about Catholicism is through Doyle, you're going to everyone's going to want to sort of hang out and be Catholic.
I can say quite firmly that is not true.
But I wanted to know how in the conversation in the seminar, either here or in other conversations, how, especially those of you coming from outside of the Catholic Church or outside of religious belief, the conversations about the not so fun parts of Catholicism, or the things that are not part of cool Pope Francis's vision, but might be some of the questions around gender, some of the questions around sexuality, some of the questions around race, how those have been come up and how you guys talked about that in the seminar.
It's sort of related, which I'm new to the university. This is my third day.
Welcome.
I'm the new Cassandra, for those who haven't. So I'm coming from the Middle East. I worked at the American University in Cairo. But the students there, we're not a very diverse. We're trying for economic diversity because we're very homogeneous. It's like 90% Egyptian, and most of those are the vast majority are Muslim. So the diversity within those students is really their experience of Islam. And there's a lot of resentment among our students who are more upwardly mobile, more liberal probably than the general population, about the media's, reporting of Islam, as if it's this monolithic, everything is Saudi Arabia, everything is Wahhabism, which is the Saudi interpretation of Islam. And that's not their experience, that's not what they believe. And so when you talk about Islam or Catholicism or Protestantism or all of the other isms, there's a diversity of viewpoints, a diversity of practices, and a diversity of ideas and beliefs. So how do you, just like the Catholics, Catholics who, very fervent, very, very fundamentalist Catholics and then very liberal progressive Catholics, and there's such a diversity of viewpoints about all of these things. So how do you recognize that in the classroom? How do you create safe spaces for people to agree, to be Catholic and disagree, or to be Muslim and say that's not me, that doesn't represent what I believe?
Donna, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I was invited to be on the panel, but I had to get my Discover class started on Boston and then take the shuttle up, so I'm late. But I just wanted to say, as a computer scientist, it's difficult to bring religion into that classroom. But what we do in there, I think, is I went a little more broader than some of you to the tenets of the RHSM sisters. You know, they have 3 beliefs. Globalization is one, social justice is another, and I think I forget, I'm dropping the 3rd one now in my rush to meet students and catch a shuttle and bounce up here. So, you know, those I can apply to computer science, right? Because we're writing the applications and programs that are improving people's lives. So, for me, it's more, not so much spiritual, but I guess it's more from the ethical point of view, too.
Yeah, Mr. Brian's question?
Yeah. No, you can.
Well, I was going to say, so what we do in the seminar is not dissimilar to what I try to do in classes after the first day when I'm trying to get them to drop. After that, you try and find some ways to build a community there so that when you get to those more difficult issues, those stickier issues, as you named some, and we could name many more. It's 9 people in a room who have spent some time eating and talking. So when those issues come up, the hope is that you're in a position where you're in a safe space to say, yeah, I think it was last year we had one who read through an article. I think this stuff right here is, to use your phrase, is bullshit. And I can't believe that the church said that. And we let that lay for a little bit, and there was this movement of, well, so do we reject everything the church says because you don't agree with this? Well, no, I liked this, and we wrestled with it. If we did this for 60 people, it would break down to arguments about those issues. So I think the size of it and the purpose of building and that's why I bring the cohorts together. I got 8 plus 8 plus 8, and in 5 years I'll have 40 people. That's a significant amount. That starts to tip some scales. But trying to make sure that place is safe enough so that we can have people who obviously have very diverse opinions within the seminar. The first day I never asked anyone to articulate what their religious beliefs or that is, but they know what they're there for, and they do it because they already feel safe because we're along colleagues, so most often it feels safe, but that's trying to model some of that then for our students, but it's not easy. Emery.
Well, and kind of as you guys are all talking, and I've told this in my group, so I think about any of us who've ever played on a team sport, and that kind of Marymount embodies that, the common ground. So what's our common goal here at Marymount? And so being able to, again, those 3 pillars, if we keep bringing back, but what brings us together? Well, what brings us together? Because it really is true. You may not like the coach. You may think the coach doesn't play enough. You may think that's like kind of the arrogant star player. But in the end, if that goal is whatever, you know, I think, again, I always love it if I can find out people played or done something where they've been part of a whole, and focus on that, because and at the same time I try to acknowledge, and of all of us, whether I'm a nurse who's made a mistake or the Catholic Church where there's been mistakes, if you acknowledge, they agree to disagree, is kind of how I try to do it with my students, because you will get people who've been hurt or burned and wounded, and so it's that bringing together. I try to.
You guys are kind of with that.
I was just jumping in also with the creating a safe environment for your students, and whether or not, I mean, that takes, of course it takes time in relationships with your students and making sure that they have that safe environment. And there are structures to put in place educationally that we teach our our new teachers how to do that in the classroom. And to your point, it's bringing out the fact that we are a team, we do respect, and that's something we actually have to teach. And I think many people don't understand that is part of our job as well, and that is creating that environment and creating that space where everybody is valued and everybody's opinions are part of the process, and making sure that students know that they're able to communicate that with you, whether or not in my classroom they write at the end of a classroom to me, what's going on, and I get some pretty incredible discussion points then that I throw out the next week and have the group discuss and talk about. So it's kind of that anonymity. If they're upset about something, we can throw it out to them. So just strategies that, as professionals, that we can bring into the classroom are just critical in the very first days of not just the craziness of the syllabus, but how do you create that community day one, and that safety net for our students.
That's great. Ali?
I just want to add on the same thing that I was part of the last year's cohort, and I really enjoyed this, and I learned a lot. And what I got on all that was we really have a great common ground. I'm Muslim, and I don't know much still after that seminar about the rituals of Catholic.
I hope a little more.
Still, Donna mentioned the 3 tenets of our station. I really can relate to that. There's nothing different what I have in my Islamic faith that I cannot talk about that or defend that or bring up a discussion. And I think this should be the way with our students, that we should show them that we are not that different. And I mean, the controversial issues or the issues we think or disagree on are maybe 5-10%. The rest is all the common. And we should focus on that and bring bridges with, I don't know, interfaith dialogue, learn about the traditions and bring up that common ground so that everybody can express their own.
Can I put in a plug while we're talking?
Sure.
So the plug is that we do have, for those of you who are new to Marymount University, we do have a yearly interfaith dialogue luncheon in the spring. And we talked about possibly also expanding that now. Meg Dalma, the Office for Community Development, and some other Marymount people went to a thing at the White House about doing interfaith dialogue through service. And so the coming attractions is that there's probably more happening on that, especially in the spring semester. So if that's something you're interested in. Dr. Garza has been running the interfaith dialogue for a few years now. I'm stepping into the breach while she's on sabbatical, learning, doing some media, fun stuff like that, writing. So we're going to be doing that stuff in the spring. So that's something you're interested in and passionate about. I also know that the Muslim Student Association and the Campus Ministry Association have been talking about trying to do more formal Christian-Muslim dialogue on campus. So those are 2 of our largest student constituencies.
We're 25 after, and Raja's speaking at 10:30. So before he sneaks out, I want to thank him and our other panelists. I know Donna has something to say that I want to be able to hear, but I want to thank the 3 of them for taking this time, and for all of you for coming. I really appreciate it.
I was just going to say, from the readings that you gave us in the seminar, that led me to look if anybody had made an encyclical on technology. And so Benedict had on World Communications Day done a statement, some short essays. So I do assign that as readings in the past. And Francis has not made an official statement, but there's been newspaper articles just even a few months ago of him discussing internet as a solution to world problems. So there's sometimes just not good real programming courses.
All right, thank you all very much.